لُقْدَةً مِّن لِّسَانِي يَفْقَهُوا قَوْلِي. As many of you know, Musa alayhi salam had a little bit of stammer in his voice, and after his trials and tribulations, he wanted to deliver this message to his people. He's a bit apprehensive about how clearly it will be understood and how well it will be received. So he reads this prayer that make my words easy and my language well understood. So I want to really think a little bit outside the box today and pose some challenges for us on this question of justice. And therefore I have chosen Sayyid Musa's prayer to seek your patience and forbearance on this. Now, in the last two lectures, we have seen a little bit about justice in two different contexts. In the first lecture, we examined the universal quest for justice. It's not only Muslims who are looking for justice. Lots of people globally are looking for justice and have been trying to get justice. And we saw things like South Africa and India and all kinds of other places. And we also saw some of the recent works of the new Pope Francis, in trying to see how he can reformulate the idea of justice within the Catholic tradition. The second lecture, we went a bit further, and we looked at two particular thinkers in recent Muslim history. One, of course, was Shahid Baqir al-Sadr, and the other one was Ali Shariati. And we saw how both of them tried to dissuade Muslims from that time, who had increasingly come to believe that justice will only come through communism in Muslim lands, because they had given up on the religious option, and they have figured out that probably if we go towards communism, maybe we can create a just society. And the contribution of these two great thinkers was to persuade young Muslims that it was possible to visualize a just society within Islam. And that is why particularly the discourse of Shariati came to be known as liberation theology, or liberation through theology rather than through communism or other ideologies. And Sayyid Sadr, of course, laid the intellectual foundations for that with his writings and activities, and finally with his publication on a possible Islamic constitution. Now we realize that both these thinkers are essentially looking at what we desire. They both felt that through some kind of an Islamic system, we would deliver a just society. They were, of course, very optimistic, and there was nothing on the ground to base their validation. I could sit here and think of many things, but many of those may not work, or may work in ways which I never anticipated, and so on. So they were, in a sense, pre any practical experience. But for their time, they delivered a very, very major service to the Ummah in the sense of positioning Islam as a religion which can deliver justice in this world. Now today we want to move on to this vexed question of what happens when you have an Islamic system. Would you automatically arrive at justice? Or are there some other things which you need to do to create a just society, which might be more difficult than pre-Islamic? See, when there is no Islamic system, something goes wrong, there is always somebody to blame. Say, this ruler doesn't allow me this, or this king doesn't allow me this, or this president doesn't allow me this, or whatever. And you are more or less exempt from blame. You are only praised for trying. If there is a system, then that blame cannot be put there. So it has to be taken on board much more seriously. Let us begin a little bit on the principles of justice within the Islamic tradition. Contrary to what many of us think, I do not think that Islam prescribes a particular economic system. I think Islam has got a number of axioms of justice which need to be implemented, taking into account the time and culture and history in which we are operating. So there is no fixed idea that you do 1, 2, 3 and everything will fall into place. And I will show you that. But let us first delve into the key principles of justice. So I think the first test comes in the time of the first 3 caliphs. As you know, apart from all the other issues which we are very familiar with, one big plus, if you like, was that in those 30, 40 years, the domain of Islam expanded manifold. So, you had large number of people from the Levant, or what is now known as Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Misr, Egypt, Iran, who had embraced Islam. And all these places were sending in their dues into the Baytul Mal. So suddenly, this small group of Bedouins who had embraced Islam with the Prophet found themselves with untold riches. Could not believe the kind of, wealth which was coming in. As you know, when wealth comes in, there is now a question of equity, distributional equity. How is it managed and who gets what? And the idea of Baitul Mal is that this is the people's bank, if you like. And then obviously there are lots of stories we hear about how the different Aimma tried to distribute this or be careful about this particular fund. So the first person to notice something changing in Muslims was Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar Ghiffari, as you know, was one of the first and probably one of the most closest companions of the Prophet as well. Now he, being a very simple man, many people call him a communist or whatever, was alarmed at the favoritism, ostentation, lack of thinking about the poor spreading amongst the Muslims. So he was standing outside the mosque every day, the Prophet's mosque in Medina, and saying to everybody who was coming out from prayer, say, do you remember that at the time of the Prophet, what we used to do? And now look at you, you are doing this, and you are doing this, and you are doing this. And everybody was quite clear that he was right. So he was effectively pricking their conscience. So they went to the third Caliph Usman bin Affan. They said, look, this man is intolerable. Yeah, he's making a mess of us. Every day we come out of prayers. So even to the extent we feel like not coming to prayers. Please send him away. So he was sent off to Muawiyah in Sham, where even Muawiyah couldn't control him, and they sent him into exile in a remote place where he passed away. But he left a very lasting legacy as to what we are talking about here. That when things get better, you cannot forget the most deprived in society. You cannot launch into favoritism. And one big problem started at that time as many of the non-Arabs started to become Muslims. They were called Mawali at that time. A lot of them were Iranians and others. It was felt and it was decided somehow to give them less share from the Baitul Mal than the Arabs. And this became a very big cause of resentment because, the basic ethic of Islam is equality on the basis of Iman rather than color, creed, or whatever. And in fact, I think we saw last Muharram or before that, that when the movements against Muawiyah started and Yazid started in Iraq, a lot of the support came from the Mawalis who were drafted in, most of the Iranians and so on. Although they were not able to exercise freely their will, but their masters felt that they had the support of these people who were also armed in some sense. But that's a debate from some other time. The main point is that this kind of thinking of differential distributions and so on came into being even from that time. It's not now. And then, of course, that has a very big question mark on what kind of justice you can deliver. There is one interesting anecdote here which we can also look at. I think it was Professor Ali Mazrui, the late, who told me once. He said, we have some skeletons in our cupboard, Muslims. I said, Prof, I'm sure we have, but it'd be nice to hear from you what this could be. He said one of them is very, very interesting. When they came to East Africa, Muslims, sometimes they told the people not to convert to Islam. I said, this is strange because this would be their main aim. He said, no, you don't know. They said, if you convert, we cannot enslave you. So we would rather that we enslave you than you convert. You see how justice can be perverted by immediate interests. Because Mazrui, as you know, in his Triple Heritage, did a lot of work on slavery and all kinds of things in Africa, both on the Muslim side, on the Christian side. And he was, in fact, criticized very badly because he said that comparatively, relatively, Western slavery was many times worse than this side. But it was there. He doesn't say that it is not there, and so on. But this is additional anecdote which he told me. So you can see in the context of justice, this is a very problematic dynamic here, right? You're telling somebody, don't become Muslim because I cannot then enslave you. What are you going to reply? However, getting back into our subject, the first time a bigger question of justice came was after Karbala. As you know, after Karbala, there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of discussion, dissatisfaction with Yazid, and so on, ultimately resulting in the downfall of the Umayyads themselves. And the key players in the downfall were what came to be known as the Abbasids. These were descendants from the uncle of the Prophet. And their legitimacy or legitimizing slogan was that we want to preserve the dignity and honor of the Ahlul Bayt. So they actually tried to come to power in terms of avenging the damage and tragedy inflicted on the Ahlul Bayt. So we would say they came to deliver a society which would respect the Ahlul Bayt. As we know from history, that probably the Abbasid kings created more havoc than the Umayyad kings in the followers of the Ahlul Bayt and for the interests of the Ahlul Bayt. So we understand that it's not automatic that it's somebody comes in the name of Islam or even Ahlul Bayt. It's going to deliver us from injustice. We still need to have a dynamic of how to combat this problem. And we can see this over and over. Even when the Safavids came to Iran, Shah Ismail, they came on the idea that they were somehow, it's a very gray kind of slogan, linked to the Ahlul Bayt, and they wanted to deliver their mission in Iran. And of course, the Safavid times was when Iran became more or less Shia altogether. However, both the Safavids and the Qajaris after them also became unjust. And there had to be movements against them within Iran itself. We come back to that a little bit just in a while, just to give you this idea that you cannot establish justice by just saying, I am bringing a government which is in favor of the Ahlul Bayt or whatever. Or, in recent times, we have attempts by, say, people like General Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan, right? He says, okay, from tomorrow, Pakistan will be an Islamic state. This is not an overnight phenomenon. Nothing will change tomorrow in Pakistan if you bring an Islamic state. Same thing is done by General Numeri in Sudan. He says, I'm declaring Islamic state from tomorrow. Both of these people have come to power illegitimately first, and now they are declaring an Islamic state, and still continuing to this day in both places without any change on the ground. So this kind of wishful thinking is also not going to deliver. It is a process. We have a very, very relevant example here from the field of economics. Some of Muslims feel that all injustice economic injustice stems from the presence of riba or usury in society. And therefore, if we ban usury, economic injustice will disappear. And Professor Nawab Haidar Naqvi, who was a leading professor of economics in Pakistan, he wrote a paper to Zia. He said, if you ban riba in Pakistan, nothing will change. Because the underlying economic relationships are exploitative and they will continue in one name or another. You have to address those before these will change. Similarly, in the context of Iran, there is a person whom we know, our people know much less, but should know more. And this is Ayatollah Sayyid Mahmud Taleqani. Ayatollah Sayyid Mahmud Taleqani obviously had championed the Islamic cause in Iran for a long time before the revolution, spent quite a lot of years in prison and so on. So he's not somebody who is just sitting on his chair. And he also argued that without fundamental land reform in Iran, economic justice will not come. So he has a whole book, Ownership in Islam. Now here there are some issues which are quite complicated, but I'll just give you a flavor. In many societies, land ownership is not absolute. You know, one of the big problems in many societies is what we call feudalism. Feudalism is where a few people own large parts of the land and employ people as waged labor or bonded labor to do their work. Ayatollah Taleqani argues that instead of that, we need to limit land ownership, which you cannot use yourself, to a certain limit. Everything else must revert to the community to be distributed back to people who can use it better, not as bonded labor, but as independent farmers. So there are discussions of whether it should be 2.5 times your annual requirement, 5 times, but this is a detail. The main principle is that ownership is not absolute. And of course, these questions came into being after the revolution. And Dr. Maros is here, he will correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think there was a big discussion on what came to be known as Bande-Jim, or the close Jim in the proposed constitution, which was trying to incorporate Ayatollah Taleqani's ideas on land and so on. I think even with the charisma and power and authority of Imam Khomeini, they couldn't get it accepted. They struggled and it was not put in. However, it's just to give you an idea that there are people who are thinking on lines. And then the important thing here is that when Ayatollah Taleqani died, and he died in the very, very early days of the revolution, Imam Khomeini, the first thing he said when he heard the news, he says, we have lost the Abu Dhar of our Zaman, referring to Abu Dhar, which I mentioned to you. And this is the man who closely reflected the kind of sentiments which Abu Dhar had for justice. However, so this problem of what to do in a supposedly Islamic system about justice is a much more complex problem than what to do in an opposition environment. In opposition, as I said, you can blame X number of people and do your small thing. But in an Islamic system, it becomes quite a lot more problematic. So this was faced, for example, I hinted at that in the last lecture, in Iran, during the time of turn of the last century in what is come to known as the Constitutional Revolution. Of course, there was discussion that now this Qajar rule was actually becoming more and more oppressive and so on, so how to replace it. Now here there is one of the main and most important texts in Shia theology on justice, I think, which we need to understand. This is the book called Tanbih al-Ummah, XYZ, of Ayatullah Muhammad Hussain Naini. Ayatullah Naini puts forward the idea very clearly that, look, in the Gaiba of the Imam, no power, no authority will be perfect. Because nobody is Masum. Everybody can make mistakes, and power is power. So he argues that probably the best or the least worst option, if you like, is to put a constitutional limitation on the exercise of power, whoever it is, from the top to the bottom. So power is governed by a constitution. If somebody transgresses that, then they can be removed constitutionally. And that constitutional revolution went on and it's played itself out. And then it had echoes in the Islamic revolution as well, and so on. And parts of it have been implemented. Parts of it are still proving problematic, and we will see which parts are problematic and why. So there could be an idea of limitations on power, constitutionally agreed. Until the Imam comes, when he comes, there's a different question altogether. We're not competent to look at it. If you look at a parallel development in the Sunni world, as we said last time, also post the abolition of the Khilafat in 1924 by Kemal Atatürk in Turkey, they were also faced with the same problem, how to deliver justice. We had movements like the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Jamaat Islami, and so on, Al-Nahda in Tunisia, and other parts in Sudan, and so on, arguing that probably establishment of an Islamic system would create justice. So Pakistan, of course, there was Mullah Maududi and his ideas on Islamic movement and government. In Tunisia, there is still now the experiment going on with Rashid Ghannouchi and his Al-Nahda party, which is part of the coalition in Tunisia at the moment. In Egypt, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin finally came to power with Morsi, and then we have seen what's happened post-Morsi. In all of them, in Turkey, we have this, what is now fashionable to call Islamist party, but the AKP of Tayyip Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In all of them, we find that post-success, the challenges become greater. They never estimated or anticipated how to run this place whilst being faithful to the tenets of Islam. Do you engage in repression, oppression, injustice, arbitrariness, this, that? Do you condone unjust economic relations? Because now, as I said, the blame is on you. You cannot blame anybody else. See, what are you doing? So, for example, this is a very interesting observation by one of the key observers and players in the early history of the Islamic revolution in Iran. And he was saying that, look, before the revolution, as many of us know, maybe, and he was just guessing, so maybe 2/3 of the people were observant, and 1/3 were just not observant. Mostly, of course, people who went to Tehran and so on saw a lot of non-observance and thought that, oh, this whole country is non-observant. But that's not so. When you go out, lots more are observant. Which is fine. At that time, we could blame it on modernism and this culture and Western culture and all kinds of things and say, fine, if we remove those things, these things will disappear, right? So after the success of the revolution, you have control on the media, on the television, on films, on cinemas, on everything, on the streets. And he was saying maybe now less than 50% are observant. So who is to blame for that? There is no outside influence on these people. We are controlling everything they get. And this is before the explosion of social media and so on, right? We could still now, again, resort to blaming social media and outside influences, but that time, no. So this poses a very big challenge as to who is responsible for creating that society. And one of the issues which we find, which is probably at the heart of the whole problem, is that whilst we have conceptualized an Islamic system, we have not thought through one particular aspect, and that is particularly in a religiously oriented system. The powers of the executive and judiciary are merged into one. Which means that what happens if an appointee of the executive, who is also the religious authority, misbehaves? Will that person be punished? Or will he be excused? So, think about it. This is a very, very big question. If he is punished, then you have to admit that you have made a wrong appointment. If he is excused, then you have a very slippery slope, which leads to all kinds of other injustices. Right? So establishing justice in this kind of a setup is even more challenging. And now if you are observing, how do you criticize that? Because in a very real sense, you are now criticizing somebody who is, well, in varying degrees, goes up and up, including representative of the divine. So, for example, in early Islamic history, the first few caliphs used to call themselves Khalifat Rasulullah. We are successors of the Prophet. By the time of Yazid, they started call themselves Khalifatullah, straight from Allah. How do you challenge them? On what basis? Because that is itself sin. And this is a key point we need to resolve if you want to create the basis of justice in supposedly Islamic societies. Otherwise, injustice can eat away and create problems. However, having said that, it's not all gloomy and doomy there, right? There are things which we need to figure out. So when we look at, say, what we call human development indicators. So normally as economists, we look at things like infant mortality rates, life expectancy, literacy levels, divide the literacy levels between males and females. Because in a place like Pakistan, for example, we see male literacy is about 30% overall. Female literacy is 14%, which means quite a number of women, even when have access, they don't have literacy. And so on. So when you compare a country like Iran, which has gone through now 40 years, so at least one generation, if you like, under a system which is Islamic, yeah? So what are its indicators like? Normally what you will find is that if you look at life expectancy, the more wealthy country you are, the better life expectancy you have. So here, for example, we are now reaching probably over 80 for men and maybe 86 for women. It's a good and a bad thing, but anyway, that's where we are. And many countries in the Western and Japan and so on will be around that, right? Once you go to poorer countries, you find even life expectancies of like under 40 overall. A country like India is hardly on 60, 58, 62. So in that sense, Iran should be somewhere around that, right? It is not. It is probably over 72 and 76 for women. So it's close to levels which would be in more developed countries, right? Literacy is close to 90%, including female literacy. Infant mortality in Iran, probably the same as the UK, or probably slightly lower, I think. We have a problem with infant mortality in this country. But it's on par. Access to clean water, 90% plus, and so on. So something on the ground has happened which has moved these things to really levels which are something to be proud of. Now, remember why I'm saying this is that these things create the basis of justice on the ground because it creates equality of opportunity. You have literacy, you don't have fear of death, you have decent health systems, and you have facilities, then obviously there are other things which need to be done, but that is the base. Turkey is doing a very similar job as Iran on these things. Its human development indicators are also moving quite well, okay? So it seems to me that, and both places have some explanations. I have some explanations, they may not be the right ones. Turkey, for example, most of the new support for the AKP over the last 10 years has come from Anatolia. And Anatolia has been traditionally the more religious part of Turkey. And as these people have migrated and into government, they seem to have incentivized the development of these basic services in the country, which over a period of 10, 15 years makes that difference. In Iran, of course, in the beginning of the revolution, we also had this kind of movements like Jihad Sazandgi and Jihad Keshawarzi and so on, this kind of jihads to develop the country. But one other thing which happens, which is quite powerful, we don't realize, is that before the revolution, most people felt that the media, television, films, cinemas were more or less kuffars owned, or kuffar propaganda. So you see, one of the symbols of the revolution before it succeeded was burning of some cinemas and all these things, because they said, this is the thing which is creating headaches for us. Post-revolution, suddenly this media became legitimate because they were owned by the Islamic government. And so it became a very rapid medium for the spread of literacy and other things across the country. Because having legitimacy, you pay attention to it, you follow it, you learn from it, and so on. And you cannot develop these things as rapidly as it happened there without this facility. So both places have different explanations, of course, but under the ground, a lot more things have changed. If we solve the justice problem on the top, which I outlined, of between authority and judiciary, we have the basis for a very productive development in these places to create a Muslim society which we should be and could be proud of, right? There's a lot of work to be done. It's not something which is simple. And of course, there are lots of vested interests and all kinds of things. Now, look at Iraq, where again we could do much more, but we are mired into a morass of corruption and nepotism and God knows what. Whom are you going to blame? This is a government majority constituted by the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Yeah, you can't go and blame anybody else. It's your own. To the extent, there was saying that, when Mosul fell, there were supposed to be 63,000 soldiers, Iraqi soldiers, in Mosul. They found that 43,000 did not exist. Only 20,000 were there. 43,000 was on paper, more, taking salaries. So who was getting this? And so on. So, when you have a system like that, you cannot do much. And mind you, these things also can reverse. Only yesterday I was reading that in certain sections of the population in the United States, life expectancy is falling again. Now, this is a lead indicator of something very bad happening on the ground. We can understand the rise of a crazy fellow like Trump from this, that those people have no stake in this kind of society. Therefore, for anybody who promises the world, these are the dangers of this kind of development. Populism, of course, also doesn't solve. Okay, now once we have that, and we have that base, where do we go from here? Now, this is the challenge for followers of Ahlul Bayt. That's why I'm saying, as I said in the beginning, I do not think we have a fixed, given system of economics. We have principles which we want to follow. We have delivered on the ground human development indicators which are quite sound. Now, what else we need to do? And I think, and this is my own judgment, that probably one of the greatest achievements of mankind in today's world has been something which we know as the welfare state, where you deliver a certain level of livelihood to all the people. This can only be done through, obviously, taxation and redistribution, right? Because somebody has to pay. Redistribution itself will create more demand and so on. That is fine. But we started in 1945 and we got tired in 1975. Then we started to roll it back. And the last 30, 40 years, we have been rolling it back, and we know where we are now, right? Just like those people supporting Trump, our people are also supporting any solution which can just satisfy them that we are okay, because they see everything crumbling around them. But in principle, that's the kind of thing we need to be able to visualize in Muslim countries. Now, with those kind of indicators, we can do it. When we come to taxation, we come up against issues. At the moment, for example, in Iran or Iraq or wherever, you regard khums and zakat as nothing to do with taxation. You regard it as part of the right of some particular ulama, right? It's not for the general taxation. Without general taxation of those levels, you cannot create this kind of society. You know how much taxation we have to pay to create that society? Our average tax here is probably 62%. You may think I'm paying 20, 25 income tax and then 12, 13 national insurance, but then you count VAT and then you count customs and you count airport tax and you count this and vehicle duty and petrol tax and whatever, comes to 62%. Until you can get there, you cannot create this kind of services and this kind of facilities. So we have to find a way to get there, yeah, within an Islamic context. See how you can use your basic sentiments of khums, zakat, infaq, whatever, to get there, right? So the government has to merge with these concepts, which is possible, it's not undoable. And if we get there, then we can create this society. Now imagine how much of injustice stems from poverty in societies. If you don't have a welfare state, if you don't have a state which takes care of the poorest, where do the poorest go? I hinted to you that you should read Dickens, I think in my first lecture, and you will see what the poor have to do. They are at the mercy of the rich, which is not a sound solution to the problem. By creating this base, you are creating a base in which ordinary day-to-day injustice is completely removed. Then you take a higher level injustice in terms of how markets operate and so on. All this can be done. We have, in countries like Iran and Turkey, the basis for doing this today. If you go back and look at 1945, I think the United Kingdom was much poorer than Iran is today or Turkey is today. It could do that system. We could create the NHS then. We could create the welfare state then. And we should be able to create this in our countries. So, to summarize, I submit to you that in this world of today, we need to conceptualize justice in quite a different way. We have challenges and we have possibilities. The good thing in both Iran and Turkey is that we have now seen changes of government without military intervention. Yeah? If you look at many other countries, there is no way to change the government. If you want to change Mr. Sisi in Egypt, what do you have to do? You have to overthrow him. There's no public way of changing it, right? If you want to change President Rouhani, next election you don't vote for him and he's out. Or Erdogan, right? So this peaceful transition of power is one of the key things which can allow for longer term vision of creating a just society. And I think we owe it to the martyrs of Karbala to put our brains together and see how overall justice can be delivered in our societies. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for your talk. Before we start the Q&A, I'd have a request from the EC. The cost for the Muharram program is about £6,000. So we would like everyone to donate whatever they can. And to donate on the ladies' side, please see me. And on the gents' side, Mustafa Walji. Salawat. Questions from the ladies' side? No, we'll start with the gents then.
Everybody's happy.
Assalamu alaikum. One thing that I noticed when you've been talking about justice in contemporary terms, it's very formalized. It's very much about justice and social justice in the sense of how we build structures, how we create states, and how we invest in the systems to redistribute wealth and deliver justice. Thinking back to the origins of Islam, when notions of nation and notions of state and notions of tribe and belonging and even possession and ownership would have been very different to what they are today when we have borders and contracts of certain kinds. Where do you see the overlap? Where do you see Islam fitting into this evolution of non-formal to becoming more and more formalized and contractualized?
So you see, there are two ways to look at it. Yeah. One is clearly that you have a reality on the ground where you have nation states and you have systems which work within those nation states, right? So you could argue that probably the best place to start would be there. However, you have also this question with the increase in exchanges between peoples, that people learn from each other, right? If you imagine before, in those times, even in the early years of Islam, we found that a lot of people, Muslim people, used to learn a lot of things when they went for Hajj and Umrah, because they could converge from different places. And those days, Hajj and Umrah was not a 2-week holiday, was like a 3, 4, 6 month business, right? So you would stay there and you would interact with people and hear and learn and see. And in the way, you will also see lots. And you take back what you have learned. So this way, things could spread. Today also, the same way, if, for example, one country succeeds in doing something within the framework of Islam, that will have a demonstration effect on others, Muslim and non-Muslim, right? So I was saying a developing country, for example, achieves that kind of thing, others will be encouraged to say, we can do it. Other peoples in other countries will say, why can't we do it? What's wrong with us? So I think that's the way I would look at it. You're quite right. But as I said, with changing circumstances, changing politics, changing geographies, you have to think in different ways.
Any questions from the ladies' side?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, do you think religion should be the driving force behind social justice? Can it come without religion? And do you think that the rollback of, for example, the welfare state since, say, 1975 is due to a kind of secularization or a rise in secularism? And are the two kind of linked?
On the question of whether religion should be the driver or could be the only driver, I think that's what probably you are. Could there be other drivers, right? I think religion is an easier driver because automatically when I relate these things to you, you accept them within the religious tradition. So I don't have to force you to, accept it. Now the only question is motivate you to practice it and also provide the structures in which you will be able to practice, right? It's much easier. For example, if you are paying zakat, it's much easier to find a way so that you pay zakat into a central fund and we can do something with it. If you are not paying, they have to start convincing you to pay something. And you say for what and whom it is going to and why not and this and that. So that becomes a little bit more difficult. So religion does provide in societies which are religious a much more easier pathway, if you like, to this.
I mean, I don't know very much about Christianity, but does it have a similar kind of taxation system? And is it just Islam that has this kind of mechanism by which it is easier to develop?
No, I mean, both
state?
Christianity and Islam have this at the heart of it, the idea of justice. As I said, for example, this Pope Francis is now formulating the idea, very similar to what I told you about, and he calls it structural sin. And he says the way societies are organized, where the rich exploit the poor, is sinful structurally, even that the society is Catholic. We now need to reevaluate. Whereas from 70s to the 2005 or 8, Catholic theologians were saying that free, laissez-faire markets are Christian, and they will deliver the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Pope Francis is saying this nonsense about trickle down is wrong. So yeah, it's similar. I mean, if you look at him or you read Taleqani or things or Shariati, you find so many similarities. They're coming from completely different traditions, but with the same underlying quest for justice.
Assalamu alaikum. My question segues from both of the previous questions. The topic you put on the table right at the beginning, the question you put before us was, what happens when you have an Islamic system? Is justice automatic, or do you have to work at it? During your talk, you discussed justice from 3 different fields and inferred 3 different definitions. And with Islamic system, you gave 5 different examples that I counted, and I'm not sure how we're defining those terms. With Islam, do you differentiate between a Muslim system and an Islamic system? And in justice, how do we recognize it?
So, you're right, this is quite an involved discourse, obviously. What we are trying to say here is that, first of all, we should not be naive and see that once an Islamic system comes, all problems will disappear of justice. Yeah? They will
Sorry,
not.
Before that, what does justice mean and what does Islamic system mean?
So, justice here, we mean a kind of, as Nazmina put in her lecture, I don't know if you were here, she brought 3 different, well, not different, but 3 related meanings of justice. One was to be just. One was qist, which is equitable, fair. And one was insaf, which is balanced. So there are 3 things right here. And when Dr. Alija was talking yesterday, he also said in the justice of God, in terms of math, for example, you detect all these three, that God will be fair. The just means something which we accept to be fair, and there will be a balance as well. Yeah. So this is three, and that's why it gets complicated, because on each count you have different challenges, right? But now it's a question of perception as to whether you create or you find that place or that system to be just or not. Now here, it is very important to see peoples or groups or areas which feel that they are unjustly treated in that system. Say why, right? If in an Islamic system somebody is treated unjustly for whatever reason, you have to figure out whether this is structural, whether this is because of a fault in the system in terms of relationships between power and judiciary or redress, or whether it is random. I mean, sometimes some things get left behind and with nobody's fault, right? Then you have to redress that. And what are the mechanisms for redressing it? This is the important thing. So you are quite right that it is a vast field. But in an Islamic system, what I was trying to say is that there is no third party to blame. It's you. I mean, your system, right? Here I could say it's May or Cameroon or whatever. But if tomorrow it was taken over by a Muslim ruler, then I don't think I can blame anybody. I say, this is me.
An Islamic system is one that's ruled by Muslims.
Yeah.
So the Umayyad system was an Islamic system, the Abbasid system was an Islamic system.
Yeah, so in that sense, yes. Now, that's where there were developments of philosophy, and this is where Imam Hussein's thing comes in, right? There are Muslim philosophers who have argued that because it's an Islamic system, you cannot oppose that rule. And so you have to accept it. And this is part of Ibn Taymiyyah's thought.
So what they're saying is you cannot oppose a Muslim ruler.
Yeah.
Not an Islamic system,
Yeah.
you cannot oppose it.
Yeah.
So if a Muslim tells you to do something, you cannot say no.
If he's a ruler, if he's hakim over you, if he has established his authority over you by means fair or foul, right? What the Imam Hussein is saying here is that no, there is a limit beyond which we will not and are not supposed to keep silent to injustice, including giving your own life.
Assalamu alaikum. It's regarding your point about centralizing the Islamic charitable taxes that we pay. It's really important, a really important point, because it will make it more effective with the amount of money that will be collected. But with the corruption in governments, how could we avoid the problem of moving the khums taxes from the ayatollahs and the charities and placing that responsibility with the government? How can we avoid that going wrong? Thank you.
So clearly, this is a question of how can we direct these monies to be spent for things which we need to be done, like the health service or whatever, right? And I think corruption is a small part of it. It's not a big part. Corruption is there in most countries in big ways or small ways or so on. But even with that, some are doing better than others. So there are ways of doing it. I think probably accountability is the bigger thing in terms of justice. Yeah. So if we can establish accountability. Now, accountability in representative governments comes from a number of sources. One is that even the top power is accountable or made accountable or is afraid to be accountable. Right? So this is where Ayatullah Taleqani's idea comes, that there is a question of constitutional accountability This is where my idea comes that you have to separate the executive from the legal or judicial authorities so that they could challenge them. But also it is for the people to support the judiciary. So let me give you two cases. In India, at the moment, the Supreme Court is perceived to be independent. The Supreme Court in India will dare to challenge the Prime Minister of India if it finds something wrong. And the people will support it. Right? In a similar system in Nigeria, the Supreme Court will never dare to challenge the president because it feels that the people will not support it. So there is a role for the people also to uphold these principles and not be expedient in their judgment. Pakistan is the same. The Supreme Court in Pakistan will not feel empowered enough to challenge the president or prime minister. Okay? So it is a multiple net, if you like. You need people support, understanding of the people that this is basic justice. And when we hear these majalis and things, we understand that every person, if he upholds or she upholds justice, it empowers the authorities to confront people who want to misappropriate or do something wrong. Then if you have civil society which can point out to misdemeanors, which is accountability, and then obviously you have periodic elections where if things go wrong, you can still replace the fellows, right? So it's a complex set of things which can make it work. But we have a lot of these elements already present in places like Iran. It has gone quite far, and it can go much further.
Thank you.
Just referring exactly, to what you mentioned last thing about justice in the countries and whatever. You mentioned Iran just now, and obviously Turkey just before that. So, and you showed them as examples of justice because they obviously have this social facilities for the people. But we see the rulers becoming quite well off in those countries. So how is that how does that work in terms of justice? I mean, and also in terms of the rulerships like in Iran, that's not actually changed in any case because that's like in the constitution that like the rahbar, so to speak, is cannot be changed in any case. Although the one in Turkey, he's now very powerful and is actually removing all the opposition in any case.
So this is quite correct. I am saying that this is very much work in progress. Yeah, but if you look at the relative picture of other countries with this, you see that they have gone quite far. When you remove the structural causes of injustice, you lay the grounds for slowly changing this, right? So look at here. We had a king who was all-powerful. Yeah? You know, if you look at Henry VIII or whatever. And then slowly, you came to a system where, in theory, the queen is all-powerful, but in practice, it's the parliament. Can you imagine the queen saying tomorrow, I'm dismissing this prime minister? If she doesn't sense support of the other MPs, right? So she has become the repository of power, not the exerciser of power. So in a place like Iran, something like that will have to happen eventually. That the repository of power will be the rahbar, but the implementers and effective holders of power will be the elected representatives. We are getting there. It will take time. Turkey, of course, is still just now, beginning to grapple with this question, yeah? And in fact, one of the big criticisms of Erdogan is that he wants to centralize power in his own office. Whether it will outlive him as a president, will the next president be the same or worse or better, remains to be seen. But in a country with that kind of indicators, it has the chance to evolve in directions which will suit its own culture and temperament. This is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that injustice is removed. I'm saying that you are laying the grounds for petty injustice to go, and then you slowly address these questions of inequality, questions of wealth, and so on. Wealth in the sense of unfairly acquired wealth, yeah, not. I don't think Islam has any strictures against becoming wealthy in a proper way, right? No, I don't think so. There are others, yeah, but it hasn't got a Christianity-like streaks. In Christianity, for example, you have this famous saying that it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of the needle than a rich man to go to heaven, indicating that wealth itself is a source of problems. Yeah, we don't have that.
Assalamu alaikum. In terms of what you spoke about, the difference between the executive and the judiciary, would you be able to cite any successful examples of where this has taken place and it has succeeded? And as a follow-up to that, would you consider Western nations as successful stories where the executive and judiciary have been divided?
So this is the key part of the success of these societies, right? So look at this question in the United States at the moment, right? You have, of course, the ultimate redress, if you like, in an appeal to the Supreme Court, right, in the United States. Now, one of the prerogatives of the president is to appoint the judges of the Supreme Court, right? At the moment, two of the old conservative judges have retired, and one is about to retire or retired, I don't know. Yeah? So Obama has appointed two who will reflect his sentiments on the thing. Not his friends, but sentiments. If he manages to appoint the third one, then the whole composition of the court changes to quite a different outlook. And that will impact on what kind of laws ultimately come in, yeah, by the time they come to the Supreme Court. So one of the efforts of the Republicans in the Congress is to postpone that appointment to the next presidency, or try to make all kinds of mischief so that the appointment goes to the next presidency, when they hope a Republican president can appoint somebody more to their liking and keep the balance as it is. Because Reagan, Bush, and so on have all had chances to appoint and so. So yes, there is a question, but that is the key base of the United States political structure, right? We also have here, the judiciary is quite independent. As you can see, many times they have overruled the government on human rights issues, on all kinds of things, and caused trouble to the extent that some of them are saying, get rid of this Human Rights Act or this or that, because we cannot live with it, right? That tension is always going to be there. But there is independence. If the Prime Minister today dismisses a senior judge because she doesn't like his ruling, what will happen? People will not accept it, right? But if she felt that the people will accept it, she'd do it, right? So it is really a question like that.
Iqbal uncle, just a follow-up on that. But a sentiment like that requires a grassroots movement as well. Yeah. So I don't think it is top-down. It has to be something that is...
Yeah, of course it's not top-down. Yeah. And this is the function of this majalis, to create that grassroots feeling that justice is important for us to fight for. in its different ways. That's why I'm trying to point out it's not only individual justice, it's structural justice, social justice, and so on. If we create these grassroots through the sentiment of the events of Karbala, then I think we are getting somewhere.
See, Assalamu alaikum, Iqbal.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I missed your earlier lectures, and it's very, very interesting to listen to you. And I actually, do share sentiments that, if you look at Iran and Turkey, they are not really examples in recent years of progress towards justice. If anything, they are but towards that, right? So, as a Muslim who actually went through the Islamic Revolution, very disenchanted, right? And I do share your sentiment that it is really up to us. You see, accountability and separation of justice and administrative powers are good. I think this is essential. We don't have that in Iran today, right? But the role is, the point of the majalis is, right? The role is really how, as we, Qawabin al-Qist, upholders of justice, right? What the other female speaker spoke. What is the vehicle to do? And I think you have alluded to the civil society is a key role to play, right? Accountability is important. Can you comment on how we can bring about transparencies to the injustice? Because that's what we can do, right? When you look at freedom of press, right, both in Iran and Turkey, they're being suppressed. We in the West do actually enjoy the liberty to bring light to injustices, right? So we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to actually bring to light these injustices that will actually move people to act. So how do you see transparency and accountability playing with each other?
So I think this is quite important, right? Because here, essentially you have to learn ways of speaking truth to power, yeah? It's not easy and it's not costless, right? However, if you look at, see, I'm slightly more familiar with Iran than Turkey, but in Iran, I think if you are really keen, you can find out anything. Find out anything. No, in the sense that you will have access to the problem.
See, my point is not so much, troubleshooting. I think that basically there should be a movement at the Muslim level to make sure the systems are inherently transparent. That's what we can do.
Yeah. So
right? For example, I'll give you an example. Let's talk about khums. Okay, the lady asked, I'm worried about if the state takes the khums, it'll be subject to corruption. But we already have that. We have lack of accountability, lack of transparency, lack of understanding how the process works, right? So, whether it's corrupt today or it might be corrupt tomorrow, it really doesn't matter. But what we can do is, hey, when we donate khums money, we want to make sure that the money is, the costs are transparent, the money is accountable, and so forth, right? That's what we have to do. We have to build the systems that are inherently transparent.
Okay, so that's where we come in, yeah? Civil society comes in there. That we have to act as conduits for our friends in Iran or Turkey or whatever to help them on these processes. Those systems are not closed. They are not North Korea. They have lots of openings which can influence. I mean, if you follow the 4 or 5 last elections in Iran, you will see amazing things have happened, which one could not expect, right? The election of President Rouhani is itself, to me, miraculous, really, despite all the attempts on the other side to stop it, right? So the Iranian people have found some way to navigate this, and we have to help them. What we find instead, this is quite disturbing, that when some of our people go to Iran to spend time and come back, they come back completely myopic. When you ask them, did you see anything? No, everything is nice. Anybody who doesn't toe the line is taguti. And nobody likes to do that. They must be having some problems to create, that kind of thing. We need to open our eyes and see what is happening and why, right? So in the early days of the revolution, I went there. One of my friends, he said, come, I take you. to the parliament. So, okay, let's go. It's nice to see. And next to the parliament, there is a huge compound, and it was very, very high walls. And I said, what is in there? He said, I want to show you. So we went and we asked the guard and we persuaded him, and he opened the door and we saw. And inside, there were brand new, latest models of Mercedes-Benz. New brand, hundreds of them. I say, what's this? He says, every MP has a right to import one duty-free. And then when they sell it, they buy a house from that. So, he said, look, this is a problem, right? And they want to hide behind these high walls because nobody then knows what is happening here. But you know what is happening. Now, how do you fight that, right? It's not the top. In Iraq, the only time the parliament is queried is with quorum proper, is when they are discussing increase in MPs' salaries. Every other time, there's no quorum. So, this is the challenge of civil society, right? A lot of Iranian people know this. They are not ignorant, but they also need assistance, right? When we say, okay, everything is good in Iran, then those people say, you see, you are only internal troublemakers. Look at your brothers outside, they are saying everything's fine.
Let's talk about justice. Right? If you look at the situation that's going on in Syria and the position that Iran has taken, right? There cannot be a position of justice to see this in so many millions of people dislocated. And there's no criticism from the followers of Ahlul Bayt who commemorate the Muharram Majalises, who remember Ali Asghar and all the things about what's happening to children in Syria, right? And that's really what is a big issue in the Muslim communities. Hey, this is why when the majority Muslim community looks at us, they say, we are blindedly following Iran. There's no voice amongst us that says, okay, this is wrong. You should not do this, right? Is that an issue of justice?
Of course, there's an issue of justice. The more you look at places like Syria, the more difficult it becomes, right? Well, there are arguments on both sides, but certainly these kind of actions cannot be based on political opportunism, right? This is the point. There will be a cost to acting on the side of justice purely, right? And that cost has to be borne. So just to conclude, when Imam Ali alayhi salam came after the assassination of the third caliph as the caliph, a person came to him, one of his close friends. He said, look, do you want to rule or do you want to suffer? What do you mean? I said, if you want to rule, you leave Muawiyah there where he is, and you leave so-and-so in Egypt where he is. You sort out the problems here, then go after them. Don't touch them in the beginning. Otherwise, you'll be finished. And Imam Ali alayhi salam told him, I cannot do that because that is unjust. So there is a cost to carrying that injustice, right? He said, okay. And you saw that during his short reign, he was just mired in one conflict after another because of this.
I think we'll end there. Thank you very much for your time and enlightening talk. Salawat.
Thank you.